I'm saying this. We on Venice Beach. That's what you're supposed to do. I've been in jail for 11 months, Savage. You got to let me get a look or something.
Hello, and welcome to the 6th episode of the MP3Cast, a show where three friends listen to an album one of us picked, any genre, any year of release, and we discuss it track by track. With me today is Scaffo.
Hey there.
And Patricio.
Hello.
This week we listened to Patricio's pick, Tupac, Me Against the World. Why don't you introduce that for us, Patricio?
Sure. This was Tupac Shakur's third studio album. He released it when he was 23 years old, I believe. It was recorded in 1994 and released in 1995 while he was actually in prison. It was released a little more than a year before his death, and when it was recorded revolving around several incidents in his life, such as an incident where he shot a couple of off-duty cops, he punched the director of Menace to Society, and he had impending rape charges on him. And slightly before this was released, he was shot 5 times, went to the hospital, checked himself out the next day, went to court immediately afterwards, got sentenced to prison, and then went to prison, and then it was released. So a lot was going on when he was writing this and when it was recorded.
All right, so why did you pick this album?
I picked it because Tupac was one of those influential artists that I listened to when I started making music, and when I really started getting into it. I first picked up one of his greatest hits albums, and I find that this is his best album to me personally, and the most coherent one. So I really wanted to pick something different for us to listen to. Also, I noticed we haven't listened to any black artists, so I thought that was probably a good idea to start with.
All right, that makes sense. Well, let's jump right into our discussion then. Let's start with the album art. Not too much going on here. It's kind of just a typical commercial album art, you know? Just put the artist center stage and use his face to sell records to me.
Yeah, it definitely looks like the sort of 90s hip-hop album. This is exactly what I would think of when I think of that sort of album art from that era.
Yeah, nothing special. Most of his album art is usually a picture of him on it, and the only thing different about this one is how dark it is in general, and kind of like how there's like a light aura around him, but there's really not much to say about it.
Yeah. There is the American flag in the background, which is notable because it's the only thing other than him that's really, you can really make out. But
I never noticed that, actually.
Yeah, this album does deal with themes of, you know, societal conditions that lead to the game, you know, the thug life. If you don't want to say that word, I feel dumb saying it. But
I also want to just remind everyone this was released in 1995, so as we talk about it, let's all remember the societal conditions at the time, like you were just mentioning.
Yeah. All right, well, let's start discussing the tracks on the album.
But in the lobby, Shakur was shot several times, including 2 graze wounds to the head. Tupac's lawyers said the attack appeared to be a setup.
So it actually starts with an intro that gives some of the background you just provided to us, with less specifics, but I really liked it. I thought it was a good way to start out the album to put you in his mind state.
Yeah, and it's also great at building intrigue for this artist. Even if you don't know anything about him, you hear this and you're like, oh, this guy's bad. He's a bad dude.
Yeah, it definitely kind of sets up where he was at the time, and it's almost like he's kind of embracing the legal trouble he's in because he stood by it so much. And some of this happened after he was put in jail, so they must have taken some footage or whatever after he was in jail and put it in at the intro. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm also impressed by the editing on here, where some of the cadence of some of the newscasters used in this matches the beat surprisingly well.
That's a nice little loop.
Speaking of the beat, yeah, the beats, it's simple, but it's really nice. I like it a lot.
Yeah. It's nice backing for the main thing you're supposed to pay attention to, which is the newscasters.
Exactly.
And it's not overly long either. There's some intros that are really long or like skits that don't really fit the album, but if it fits pretty well. It's not even him on it at all.
Yeah, notably, this is the only song on the entire album that is not between 4 and 5 minutes. I kind of thought it was funny that there's a song that's 4 minutes, there's a song that's 5 minutes, and then all kinds of combinations in between, but never more or less.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the first proper track on the album, If I Die Tonight.
I'm going to be giving all my input like last year because I have a lot of history and stuff that goes with a lot of this, so I want to hear you guys' thoughts first before I influence it.
All right,
well, then I'll start. I like his flow on this track. I think it's probably his best flow on the whole album. He uses a lot of alliteration and a ton of internal rhyming. It really shows off his technical skill when it comes to rapping.
Definitely.
And it also has...
I also, regarding the flow, I want to point out that how many concussive sort of sounds, like hard consonants like P's, he uses throughout, really adds to the tone of the track.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the alliteration and the rhyme scheme in this is insane how well it's performed. Even not even looking at lyrical content itself, again, just the way he performs it and how he was described as when people rap, they rap from a certain part of their body. So like some people rap from the throat, some people from like the nasal or whatever. You can feel how he's rapping from like his stomach here, like his gut, and it's like all of his energy in it. So it definitely is a hard hitting track for the first actual song on the album.
Yeah. It does a good job of introducing his situation from his perspective. As if you start out with the newscaster's perspective, a perspective from the outside looking in, then he gives you what's going on in his life, how he views it as far as lyrical content goes. And it does a good job of helping you understand him. Like, there's a lot of just flexing, just like, I'm bad, that type of rap, but he also gives you some looks at the reasoning behind it,
Yeah, definitely. I also really like the use of static as a sound effect, especially around the hook. It's really good, and it's not overbearing like some songs would use it.
Yeah, that's definitely... I think the instrumentals on this album and this song, they're all very similar, and you can tell they're for the same album, but they're usually done very well, and his vocals tend to sit very well in it too. Lyrically, this song, I mean, it's pretty obvious what all of these songs are about for the most part. I think this one is a good intro to what the rest of them will be, and he's almost prophesizing his own death, but also talking about, to a degree, how he's bringing it upon himself and all the crimes and fights and things that he commits himself, almost like he understands that he might die because of them, and he keeps doing it anyway.
Yeah, he knows that he's not putting himself in a position to have a long life, you know? But, all right, well, moving on to the next track, Me Against the World. I'm losing my homies in a hurry. They relocating to the cemetery. Got me worried, stressing my business blurry. The question is, will I live? No one in the world. I wasn't really feeling this track. It felt kind of like a throwaway compared to the rest of the album. The message is uplifting. That's kind of cool, but I don't know. It just felt kind of generic. Yeah. A lot of the themes he introduces in this track are expanded upon better in other tracks on the album. It's funny because this is the titular track of the album, but it doesn't really stand out to me. It kind of fades into the background. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's one of his like staple tracks that people would probably quote. He's got a lot of song names that people quote a lot. But honestly, as a song on the album and itself, it just feels kind of weaker compared to the rest. the imagery on it and about the death and sorrow on the streets is really well brought upon. And his voice is always hard-hitting and just as powerful, but I think a lot of it too is the feature on there from one of the Outlaws members. It makes it feel like a weaker song as a whole, and I would hope that the title track would be a little better, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I liked that he didn't have too many features on the album. There's only 3 songs with features on the whole album of 14 tracks, but I wish this one didn't have the feature, you know?
Yeah, I think... Go ahead.
I believe the person that was featured on this track was also featured on a track towards the end of the album.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't like either of those features.
Yeah, I'll explain the features. The main rapping features, other than one of them that I know of, are the Outlaws, which was like the group that he kind of ran with, and they're on a lot of his albums as features. Actually, I think like almost every single one. But it's usually, to me, they're more just filler to break up his verses. So they're okay, but usually his voice is so much more powerful and meaningful that I feel like it's a waste to put them on there, honestly.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like with a lot of this album, it has a coherent vision, and there's not a story through line, but the themes are repeated throughout and expanded upon, and the guest verses just don't fit in the songs the same way, and that kind of makes me wish they weren't there,
especially for such a personal album.
Yeah,
I will say this is a more positive song, though. Sorry, before we move on, I'll say it's a more positive and like, even though it's talking about being lonesome and by yourself, it feels more positive than a lot of the songs on here.
Yeah.
The production isn't as dark and gloomy as it gets on a lot of tracks in this album.
Definitely.
All right. The next song, speaking of dark and gloomy, is So Many Tears.
Lord, I lost so many pigs and shed so many tears.
This felt like one of the more personal all of the tracks on here are personal, it feels like, at least most of them. But this one is him singing about the life he lives and how he loses his, like, eat the hook. I suffered through the years and shed so many tears. I lost so many peers. You know, the whole album is just about how the life he lives invites death.
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely. I do think that the verses on this entire track, they just sort of get better and better with each verse. The first verse starts off and it's kind of, it's okay. Then the second one, it's pretty good, pretty decent. Third one's, it's great. I like the third verse. The fourth verse is spectacular. I love the fourth verse on this track. It's one of the best on the album, for sure.
He always does. I don't think any verse is better than the others, but he does find a really good way to always build up to what he's saying. And even though he does bounce between ideas a lot, this song is so personal, and I'll just say every verse feels full and sincere. It doesn't feel like any of it's full or filler. So to have 4 full verses on here is insane to me. The chorus, I'd say, is the weakest part, but he does a great job of transitioning from chorus to his verses.
Yeah, the hook, I do agree, it is the weakest part, but there is this harmonica in
I love that
they use. Yeah, the harmonic is great in this.
Yeah, the production overall, I like that it's understated, but it does have a variety of instruments. They're just only used in select parts. They're not throughout the whole track, and I really like that.
Yeah.
It helps certain lines hit harder.
I also, I didn't mention this, but If I Die Tonight has this outro fade out thing that's really long. And there's another one here. I don't really like these really long fade out. It's fading out for like half a minute. It's too much, I think.
I do agree with that, but while I agree with it, I think it would be better if it was his vocals in the fade outs, but the fact that it's the background vocals and the assisting it does make it weaker. But it kind of also adds to the time of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if he was going for 4 to 5 minutes, the fade outs definitely helped that.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of tracks on here could have been shortened, you know? Not verse-wise, but just like the hook shows up too many times or it takes too long to end.
I thought for this song, his mix of straight vocals and layered vocals is really well done. He's not necessarily singing, but he has this very unique style where and we'll hear it later on, where he doubles his voice or doubles, triples, quadruples his voice on top of each other, which can sound overbearing, but he makes it work really well when a lot of artists might not. And just this song as a whole, lyrically, I think it's one of the best of them all. It's like a tribute to his fallen friends, but a fear of his own death, and he's also talking about suicidal tendencies here, like a straight contradiction. Like he's scared of death, but also he wants to leave a legacy before he dies. It's very sad as a whole, but I think relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah. Throughout this album, the most prevalent theme is death, and he talks a lot about how that dichotomy of being afraid of death and the feeling that it's imminent that he gets from his, how he spends his time, but then also that he's not afraid of death, he ain't afraid to die, stuff like that,
Yeah.
Because of that, my girlfriend pointed this out to me. I think a lot of this song too is also like a letter to God explaining why he's been bad, and he probably thought he was going to hell. So at the beginning, he opens up with a prayer, and it's almost like he's telling God, hey, I'm sorry for all the stuff I do and have done and will do. And he hopes he gets to go to heaven or leave behind something, and it's not all for nothing.
Yeah. All right, well, the next track on the album is Temptations.
Even though I'm known for my one night stand, look here, I wanna be an honest man, but temptations come.
This one I felt like for me specifically was a low point. It's a song about how he wants to be loyal, but he can't because of, he says like he's got a girl in every city, but he is prone to one stands, so he can't really have a relationship. But nothing he says is particularly unique, it's not like a situation specific to his viewpoint. It's a song I feel like I've heard a lot before, and it kind of turns me away from it.
Yeah, I agree. And the delivery isn't anything special either, I don't feel. The first verse where he's saying, he wishes he could be loyal, isn't delivered with much heart. And then he proceeds to describe in gratuitous detail how these sort of one-night stands on tour work. And so it doesn't, there's no heart behind it, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's he's kind of acting like a dick jock here, like kind of full of himself, and it's nothing special. It's notable of other music, especially rap music of this time, from like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and people like that. So it's not special. I do think it's kind of an upbeat and fun song, maybe that would be played in like a club or just something to kind of chill to. It's a little more upbeat than the other ones, not so dark, but it's really nothing special lyrically. I just like the production on it, honestly.
Yeah, it does feel kind of like it was there as sort of this is a thing that rappers do, so let's include it.
Yeah, I think it was kind of to put himself in the contender's hat for other rappers who were doing similar things, but this isn't really where he shines. He shines in more conscious rap.
Yeah, and this song really sticks out like a sore thumb in the album to me, because like, he has a better song about relationships with women later on in the album that we'll get to. And it doesn't really hit on any of the same themes that he talks about in the other tracks. It's just sort of there in the middle. It's almost like just a single that he released and he had to put it on the album.
It's also kind of funny that this song is on here when he was impending and also got put in prison for a rape charge, even though it wasn't proven. I'm just saying it's an interesting track to throw on here. I'm sure some lawyer probably looked at it as like proof in court.
That'd be interesting. I don't know if that's the case, but
I don't know if it was either, but I'm saying that's something. It sounds like something a lawyer would do.
Yeah, maybe. All right, well, the next track on the album is the 6th track. It's Young.
And I can't help but reminisce back when we slung drugs, know it's bad. But all we had was our hopes and dreams. Couldn't see unless we learned to sling dope to fiends.
Beyond the title, I really do like this track. I think it's a good warning to kids that grew up in the same situation he grew up in, you know? Just like, this is how I got involved with this. You don't have to do that. You don't need to be a thug, you know?
Exactly. It's kind of like, don't look up to this sort of lifestyle. You could be doing so much more with your life. A bunch of people would kill to, start from your position instead.
Yeah, it's obviously talking about when he started selling drugs, trying to hustle, and how he kind of misses those days, but like that way of life was bullshit. He even talks about making plans with his mom if he's killed, and like how that's not a cool thing to do. It's even though it's a dark song, it's pretty positive in trying to tell kids, like he says at the end, you could be a lawyer, an accountant. You don't have to be a drug dealer to get where you want in life. And I think it's a really positive thing for him to say, especially with this type of power he held at the time.
Definitely. I also want to point out that this was the first song I felt like had just very stellar production. I really like the production on this track.
I'm going to wait to comment on that.
It didn't really stick out in my mind too much. I was more drawn in by the lyrical content of the song. Although I will say the hook on this one I did not like. I didn't like the
I think that was
delivery.
the weakest point of the song. Well, second weakest. I thought the outro was booty. I did not like the outro at all.
Really? Oh, I think the choruses on most of these songs are subpar to bad, but usually I think it's because he's not on them for the most part. Like, again, such a personal album, his voice is so powerful, but him not being on them just feels kind of weak.
Yeah, I do think around this time a lot of 90s hip hop did have the hook just be backup vocals and the beat, which is not something I'm a fan of. So I kind of get why it's there. It was common, everyone was doing it.
Yeah, and I think the production also in the song is one of my favorite as well. And I would say it's not special as a whole, but the way the dropouts work on it, it's just holds really well for what he's talking about.
Yeah, I do think a lot of the production on this album, when I say stellar, it's stellar in the context of the album. The production itself isn't something like I would listen to as a standalone, like a lot of good production in hip hop is. But a lot of the beats on this album are samey, but sometimes I really like the small variations they do. It makes it really stick out.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I would rather talk about production on a different song in particular.
Okay. Well, the next track is Heavy in the Game.
Always look good, you vex, show him look good every time. Oh, pussle walk, step off, I know some of the blood clot in a fucking game.
And here it is.
Oh, all right, well, let's start with that then. What were your thoughts on the production?
I used to like it, but like as I've gotten older, I really can't stand this song's production. I think it's the normal synths on beat are fine, but just the overall additions feel so strange. I think production on his next albums were much better than this one as a whole, and this one just feels overwhelming for like his vocals don't feel like the vocal anymore. It feels like the beat is supposed to be, and I don't like how like funky weird it is.
Yeah, the beat kind of it's overstated, and I agree with you. The like synthy electro funk, I'm just not really a fan of.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also, the sort of, I don't know who it was that had that really thick accent.
The Jamaican one?
Yeah, the Jamaican accent. It felt out of place, and what she was saying wasn't anything substantial. It wasn't that important to the song, I felt. It just kind of dragged it on, and it was weird, and I didn't really like it.
Yeah, I like a hook aside from the ad-libs with that Jamaican accent. I do like the "Game's Been Good to Me" refrain, but without those ad-libs, that it would just be the same 5 words repeated like 3 times.
I 100% agree on that.
The hook overall, even though I do like that refrain, is just really weak on this track to me.
Yeah. I do think this is the best feature on the album. But that's not really saying much, as the features on this album aren't really the best thing.
It's the best rap feature for sure.
Yeah.
He's not part of Outlaws, I want to point out. So that's not to be a dick to them, but that's probably why. He's a more like G-funk rapper. But yeah, he felt like he belonged with him,
Yeah.
But I think the beat was made more for the feature than Tupac himself, it feels like.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Tupac's flow is on point. His lyrics, of course, are the same as always. I mean, he's just talking about hustling, making money, moving up in the game no matter what, but it's not really anything more substantial. So it feels like it's a song not really for him.
Yeah, but I do feel like at least the rhyme scheme was interesting throughout. It wasn't like the craziest rhyme scheme on the album or anything, but it was consistently interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's what I notice in a lot of songs on here is Tupac can rap, he's got good technical ability and he can construct a verse well. It's just sometimes the content of his verses gets samey, especially listening to a whole album of Tupac. He's talking about the same thing pretty much all the time, and it's hard to get verses to stand out when they're all the same content,
Yeah, I agree. I think it does kind of make sense. He was, a young kid at the time, so.
Yeah, he lived a very short time, but I think from album to album, which of course we're not discussing other albums, I'm just saying from album to album, he had different phases of what he would talk about. And this was his album about all the cases and stuff he's going through, being shot, obviously, everything having to do with death. And while he talks about that in other albums, this is like almost every song on here is about death, suicide, and him trying to live his life to the fullest in the meantime, but still getting into trouble. So I agree, it's very hard to pick out particular verses that hold a lot of weight or meaning. But I think combined, like they all fit really well in an album. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can see what you mean.
And one thing I did notice while listening to it is listening to the album was I felt like this song went well with the previous song, as he's urging against this style of life in the previous song, but then in this one he's like giving you a guide on how to live this life the right way, Like he even advises against like just stealing, that's not a good way to go about this business. I thought that was an interesting element, but it's not enough to carry the song,
Yeah.
He really is kind of it's like hypocritical, but I don't consider it in a negative way. It's more him saying, don't do what I do, don't be what I am. But if you're going to, do it the right way. Don't fuck other people over, watch who you're hanging out with. And, this isn't the life you want to live, but if you're going to live it, do it the right way. And this is how I'm trying to. I mean, it's not positive, but it's also him not pretending to be something he's not. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. He does reveal, like in a later track, that he started dealing not because, he thought it was cool, but because his mom needed help, get some extra money. So maybe it's like part of, sometimes it can't be avoided. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, sometimes you're a product of your environment and there's not much you can do to escape it. And that's something he talks about a lot in this album, is like society puts specifically young black men into this position to where that's almost all they can do is sell dope, otherwise they don't have money and they can't help their family.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my context for that. I was waiting till someone said that. He started selling drugs to try to make money for him and his family. And he became friends with the neighborhood drug dealers. He talks about them later on, about how they were good to him. They were nice, and they were doing it not to get people hooked on drugs, but to make money. And that's all they saw. But eventually they gave him money and said, get out of this, stop dealing drugs. You're meant to do more. You're meant to be a rapper. You're not meant to do what we're doing. Do something better with your life. And I don't think he talks about it on this album, but later on he does talk about it in other albums and appreciates what they did for him. And he tries to show that not every drug dealer, not every gangster or gangbanger is out there just to cause trouble. They're just trying to do the best with what they've got. So, I mean, it's not related to the song, but I'm giving you guys context for other ones.
All right.
All right. Speaking of other songs, the next track is the halfway point in the album, Lord Knows, the 8th track.
Homies died in my arms with his brains hanging. Fucked up, I had to tell him it was alright. And that's a lie, and he knew it when he shook and died.
The standout part of this entire song was that third verse, especially the ending. It punches so hard. This album does like to deliver on those emotional punches, but I feel like this is the strongest emotional punch on the album.
Yeah, for sure. How he talks about how he needs to self-medicate because of all the stuff he's been through, otherwise he might just blow his brains out.
Exactly.
It really hits hard.
Yeah, this song is heavily focused on suicide and self-medicating. Like you guys just mentioned, I smoke a blunt to take the pain out. If I wasn't high, I'd probably try to blow my brains out. It's pretty depressing to listen to, but like I think a lot of people back then and even now could totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also really like the sort of biting imagery that they use, like when he's describing, holding his friend and telling him it's going to be okay, even though he knows his friend is dying.
That's one of the saddest parts of this album to me.
Yeah.
This song really puts you in the shoes of someone who's scared yet ready for death at the same time. And it's like the concept of mortality is pushing him to drink and smoke in order just to like get along with life. And it also introduces like paranoia of death, but also a self-fulfilling prophecy about it. And I think it's really complemented by the double vocals. Did you guys catch that? How he's using 2 sets of vocals in each ear, or one in each ear?
I think I know what you're talking about. I wasn't sure what was causing that effect.
Yeah. So if you listen on headphones, pull one ear out, and you'll have one set of vocals. So it's 100%. There's 2 sets, but it's 100% in each ear. So if you listen in only one, you're only going to hear one of his voices. So it's a really interesting effect.
Yeah. What you were talking about with the paranoia, I like that element, how he is paranoid and he portrays that on this track. He he realizes he's being paranoid, but then also all of these fears he has are rational, you know? It's not like he's paranoid because of nothing. It's almost like not really paranoia, it's just how you have to live, what his situation is like, you know? But
did you guys generally like or dislike this song?
Oh, I really like this song.
yeah, I like it too. It's probably my second favorite flow on the whole album is on this track.
Yeah. The only thing that was kind of weaker on this track, aside from another long fade out, but that's whatever, was the production didn't feel like that significant. It felt really like the variations were so small on the same sort of production that's on a lot of tracks on here. I don't know, it just felt kind of samey, but they are the background, so it doesn't really matter if they are that samey, if they have good lyrics over them.
What do you mean, like, samey? You mean, like, just regular? Like, nothing special?
There's this very specific sort of beat that goes on throughout the entire album, I feel. I feel like the same drum pattern is used. Mm-hmm. The same melody, just with different sort of sounds. It's over half the album, I feel, has this same sort of production, so I don't really have much to say about that sort of formula. I don't know. Did you pick up on that, Johnny? Or was that just me?
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about with the samey production and how... I think it's... Tupac's... I don't know how to say this. I do know what you mean, though.
I know you mean too. I don't think it's him more. I think it's the producer, who I think Daz produced most of this. Who, not that you need to know who that is, but I think it was mostly the same producer for the whole album.
Okay.
Whereas on his next one, Dr. Dre produced some of it, and Daz produced others. You know, so it was a mix. And this one, most instrumentals did feel the same.
I almost felt like if you told me that Tupac picked all of these beats out himself, like it was just a variety of producers, I would believe you, because it seems almost like he picked out the beats that match how he likes to rap, and that led to a lot of the sameness. But
yeah,
I don't know anything about how the beats were constructed for this album, so
yeah, I could believe that too. I think it definitely, like, all of the beats, even if they are the same, clearly they work with his flow. There's a reason that they are on the album, but, you know.
I think what it is to give him a lot of room to breathe and to tell his stories, and maybe that's why a lot of them do feel repetitive or simple, even if they're complex, you know what I mean? Simple, like nothing interesting. So I think maybe it just gives him enough room to speak about what he needs.
Yep. All right, well, the next track on this album is Dear Mama.
Even though I sell rocks, it feels good putting money in your mailbox. I love paying rent when the rent's due. I hope you got the diamond necklace that I sent to you.
This one is one of the most focused tracks on the album, talking about growing up with a single mom. And
yeah. Unlike the last one, I did like the production on this one. It did a really good job of feeling like nostalgic and warm.
Yeah. I also like this production because what you were saying with the sameness, I feel like that's not a problem with this one. It stands out really well from the other tracks.
Definitely.
Yeah. This track as a whole stands out. It's more hopeful, you know, it's more... A lot of this, he looks back on his past with, like, talking about how bad things were, and there's a level of nostalgia, but it's also, like, how he got here, and, like, talking about his friend with his brains blown out on the last track. But on this one, it's just... There is some dark elements, but it's offset by him talking about this woman that's such an inspiration to him and really took care of him, you know? So... It's bittersweet, but it's still sweet.
Yeah, for sure.
Tupac doesn't really exist without some element of darkness, but in this song especially, even though he talks about a dark childhood, he talks about it's a beautiful tribute to his mom who did the best she could, even with poverty, tragedy, and having troublesome children. So the instrumental really does fit it with its, the piano, the vocal harmonization, and I've actually really liked the chorus on this one versus other songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was definitely a standout track for sure.
Yeah.
There was one particular line that did a really good job of showing just how the environment he grew up in was. Just the simple line, I love paying my rent on time. It just...
Oh, yeah.
It's just so simple, but it just says so much about what he grew up with.
Yeah. The uncertainty of whether any of the bills would get paid this month.
Exactly.
And then the follow-up line where he says, I hope you got the diamond necklace that I sent to you, is also like exceeding being able to just pay bills and how nice that must feel, especially at his young age. I mean, again, remember 23 years old, and he's been trying to help pay bills since he was like 15 or whatever. So to him, that must feel like a huge success.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was really sweet, him talking about just putting money in his mom's mailbox.
Yeah. But it's also sad when he talks about how troublesome he was. And this is him recognizing as a kid when he thought he was helping, he wasn't. And, hugging his mom through a jail cell, that's no way to be respectful of her,
Yeah.
Yeah. And he does bring that up in the hook when he, he's saying that, I know I can't really pay you back. Even if he does, give her money in her mailbox and give her these diamond necklaces because he has all this money, he still can't pay her back for all the strife that he's caused her.
It's truly, I think most people, would be the song they would know from him, and I think it's well deserving of it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The production on it's wonderful too.
Yep. All right, well, the next track is the 10th on the album, It Ain't Easy.
It ain't easy being me. Will I see the penitentiary or will I stay free?
This one is the one that most directly ties into his personal situation at the time, with the hook, will I see the penitentiary or will I stay free? This uncertainty in his future. We talked about in the last track how he had that uncertainty in his past. And even though now he has all this money, he still can't have a steady life, because of the situation he grew up in, of the game, he can't really get out of it. It's gave him all this money, but it still isn't enough,
Okay, I guess I'll go. I thought this, it definitely is relating to his current situation, and it takes the same topics that are discussed throughout the whole album, but it puts it into a more calm and composed manner. I mean, the beat is reflective of it. It's a chill, venting song. It sounds like he's reminiscing about his life as a whole, too. Reminiscing and also thinking about his current situation, both the good and bad. Talking about the crimes that's been committed, smoking weed just to chill, watching the cops go by, worrying about going to prison. But it's really just a reflective song. It's not, no action is being called to himself here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think this is reflected in the production. It does have that sort of sad, nostalgic sort of feel to it.
Yeah, and that trailing off bass line in the background, the synthy bass line that just trails off at the end, shows up all throughout the track, really gives that sense of looking back at your past,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this also really long, drawn-out guitar that plays in the right ear. I'm listening to it now, trying to figure out what ear it's in. But there's this really weird, I don't know what it is in the left ear. It's like playing with it sounds like someone's playing with a guitar repeatedly. That's the only thing I don't like about this song. I think the song as a whole is decent, not great, but it's definitely a good change of pace from how dark the other ones are.
Yeah.
I think this song's pretty good. I liked it.
Yeah, I felt like it was pretty good. I think this album is pretty bottom heavy, you know? I don't necessarily like
for
it
sure.
so much for the first bit, but towards the end it really ramps up and gets better. And I think this is part of that, you know?
I think he usually, in album songs, you know, he's always trying to make it better toward the end so people stay, and it feels like this album is definitely building up to the last few songs.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on from there, the next track is Can You Get Away?
I know. Just for a little while, I know it's hard.
Which is the one I was referring to earlier when I said he has a better song about a relationship with a woman on this album.
Yep. I do know this was a different time, but boy, I cannot get behind this message.
What do you mean when you say that?
So, I feel like if you just... The song would instantly, especially the hook, would instantly become creepy if you just took out the woman saying that she was unhappy in this relationship. If it was just him like, oh, you know, I can tell you're unhappy. I can, you know, you can get away if you want to. You could come to me instead. It's, I don't know.
Yeah. I understand the problem you have with it, but with the background that this is a woman in an abusive relationship, you know, it's not just him trying to steal away an uninterested woman from some guy. It's him being attracted to this woman and knowing she's in a situation that's unsafe and he wants her to get out of it. I feel like with that it's more appropriate, but
yeah, I just kind of, if he was going for that, it could have been put more forward. It's kind of like mentioned very lightly throughout, like maybe 3 times.
Yeah, I see what you're both saying. I've always... I think the female vocals steal the show on this, honestly. This has always been one of my least favorite songs by him. The message in it as a whole, while much more positive than like on Temptations, where he's talking to her saying, you know, you could get away from this, you don't have to be here. But the fact that he's not just saying you can get away, he's saying you should come to me instead, it makes it feel a little less sincere. But I mean, there is a part toward the end, I think, in the spoken word part, where he's saying you don't have to change your lifestyle for me, you don't even have to be with me, just get away from that. There's no point in being with someone who's gonna beat the hell out of you and you're going to ICU and stuff. So I mean, it's a much sweeter song than like Temptations. It's him showing actual passion rather than like just wanting to fuck something.
But it also has that
it's better.
Undercurrent of him, this being, it's almost out of a place of more self-interest than caring about her, you know? It's like, I'm attracted to you.
Yeah, that's definitely what it felt like to me.
Well, just the intro kind of is like that. He's like, can you come with me, please? Like, he's like begging her, and it's not like trying to reason with her. It's just saying, come on, like, if I bug you enough, will you? Like, it's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
I really think the female vocals on here shine, though. Not that he's ever lyrically bad, but I really like the lady on it.
But
yeah, it definitely makes the hook a lot better. That's for sure.
I will say, though, I think this is kind of an ironic song with the rape allegations in the background, you know, this context.
That's
kind of not very smart to release this song with that background, but
I want to reiterate, it wasn't proven.
Still, you know, bad press.
I know, still.
Not a good look, I'll say that.
Yeah.
I don't know about press at the time, but it's
yeah,
not really a good look if you ask me. But at the same time though, he's portraying this, when I say character, I don't know if it's entirely fictional, because obviously he does have a history with this, but that he's this tough gangster that's, really hard. And so having this passionate song at all is kind of a subversion of your expectations, but it's almost like he couldn't fully get away from that image, and he had to make it about him still,
Yeah, without going into too much of a discussion of him as a whole, I think that there definitely was the real him, and then there was a character of him, and this album is kind of like where those two meet. And the next album is, a lot of it's a character, but this one is like, you see a lot of the real him coming out, and I think there are softer parts on this, like this song in particular, where it's him trying to show that he's not just this one-sided thug who is always in jail for whatever reason. Like there's reasons to what he does. So I think for that reason, this is a decent song. I just
me neither.
Don't care for it.
Moving on from there, the next song is Old School. 11 tribute to the music that inspired him and that he grew up on. I really like this song. I love the...
Yeah, this song's great. The hook, I feel like this is the best hook on the entire album.
It's the most inspired one. Most of them, it feels like the hook is just there to make so he can separate his verses. But on this one, I feel like it's a part of the song, It fits and it's good. It contributes,
Yeah, I also really like the different samples they play with during the outro. There's very little sampling on this album, but this track has it in spades, and it's a ton of fun because of it.
And it's definitely a fitting one for it, too.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is a great tribute to the people who came before him, and it's a wonderful song to put on here, trying to say, while I may be doing this music thing, I couldn't do it without the people before me, and I feel like that's something that's missing from a lot of artists as a whole. Doesn't matter what time period, and this is a wonderful tribute to those people, and he calls them out by name too. He doesn't just say thanks to people before me.
In spades.
He calls those out by name. The things they used to do
by name on this track, especially in the first verse.
Definitely.
The first 3 lines are almost entirely names of other artists. But
even artists who are like almost competing with him at the time. Like at the end, he mentions like LL Cool J is hard as hell. Like it's funny because they're kind of in the same time period. So he's not only giving tribute to the people before him, but the people who are coming up with him.
I was surprised to hear this track with him so directly acknowledging these people, because almost all of them are from the East Coast, from New York City and Brooklyn. And I don't know a lot about Tupac. I'm not too familiar with him, but I obviously do know about the East Coast, West Coast feud with him and Biggie. So it was kind of surprising to me that this is on here. Oh, absolutely.
Mind if I take 2 minutes to address that? Because I'm glad you brought that up. So this album came out before that beef happened. And I wrote down, it's significant that he's calling out Brooklyn, the Bronx, all of Staten Island, all of New York, the East Coast, and all these people. People like to forget about this song, but what started the East Coast, West Coast thing, it wasn't even him. So right before he went to prison, like I said, he got shot. I think he was recording a song for this album or something. He was in New York, I believe, and he got robbed in the lobby of a recording studio and shot 5 times. And upstairs was Biggie and Puff Daddy. I think Biggie was actually there. Basically, long story short, he was told in jail and by multiple people that Biggie and that group knew that he was going to get robbed and shot and didn't do anything about it, or might have even set it up themselves. So when he was in prison and afterwards, he had a huge problem with them but he never had a problem with the East Coast as a whole. The media took what he was saying and blew it up to an East Coast versus West Coast thing because that made a lot more money. Okay. He never had a problem with the East Coast itself. And again, this is good proof of that he never did have a problem with them. I mean, he's from the East Coast.
Yeah, you can definitely tell he doesn't. He even says, like, back in the day, people didn't want to admit they weren't from Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yeah, he never had a problem with the East Coast. And again, he grew up there. He went to school there. He was recording in New York. Like, again, he was there. So there was never an issue with it. But when he ended up going to Death Row and moving to the West Coast in California, the media was blowing it up, and also a lot of artists came out to defend Biggie and their crew and were saying fuck Tupac, fuck them, fuck Death Row. And also a lot of East Coast rappers and the rap scene didn't accept the West Coast, like what Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and Ice Cube were doing. They thought of them as like fake rap, and he took issue with that. So it got blown up afterwards, but again, he never had an issue with them until other people started fucking with him. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that all happened after this album was released.
Well, mostly after this album was released, because it references that directly in the intro. But
okay, yeah. Like I said, the intro was recorded like after he was in prison, or part of it was, So that's definitely, part of it.
Well, now that we have that history lesson, let's move on to the next song. The 13th track on the album starts winding it down. Fuck the World.
Told the judge I'm in danger, and that's why I had that 4-5 with one in the chamber. Fuck the world. Trying to say that I don't care.
Winding down, fuck the world. But
so I really didn't like the synths on this production. They really distract, and not in a good way. It's ugh.
Yeah,
it's gross.
Overall, I'm not a huge fan of synths. I think they can be used well, but they're so prevalent in this album, And
yeah, I don't feel like any of the synths that are used on this album I like. But this is an especially egregious example.
They really are overbearing on this song in particular. It doesn't take away from my love of the song, but yeah, I'll agree they're overbearing.
So, you say your love of this song. Is this a standout track to you?
Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Aside from that, the synth production, I mean, it's totally overbearing. But this is like pure energy and aggression, and especially, it's like a wonderful theme for especially young black men of the time who were tired and oppressed. You're tired of this oppressive system. They're told you got to be quiet, respectful, or you're going to be treated like a thug. And this is him saying, fuck that. Like, you want to look at me like a thug? Okay, like, fuck you all then, which is very him. And I think this is a very him song, He wasn't scared of bad press.
All right. I don't know. I don't feel like it was really that stand out to me.
Yeah.
It's okay. I feel like the hook is better than most on this album, but I only felt like the hook was okay. The outro. I do like the outro. The outro was pretty cool. But that was the best part of the track. It was like, I don't know. It was an okay track.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was mostly just okay to me. It's not a slog to listen to, but it's also not something I'm going to go back and specifically revisit. Mostly, it's ironic. It's mostly because of what you were talking about, Patricio. It's just an aggressive track, and I'm not really into that,
Yeah, I can definitely see. I can see most people not liking this, but I think it really fits more the more you know about him, and I think it's just that's why I like it so much, because especially when you're trying to put yourself in the perspective of people like him at the time, it's a more contextual song for sure. Also, I like the gun rights advocacy partway through it. That was kind of funny to me. I don't know if you guys caught that. Yeah, he was talking about I told the judge, or said my life's in danger. That's why I had that 4.501 in the chamber. And he's basically talking about, especially back then, in the hood and stuff, not everyone owns a gun legally, but it's not because they're going around gangbanging. It's for fucking protection. So a lot of people like himself would get caught with illegally carrying weapons and stuff. So that's, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I just view that as another part of the gangster lifestyle,
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's the context part.
Yeah. But all right, so overall this seemed pretty forgettable to at least two of us. But moving on to the next track, Death Around the Corner, the penultimate song.
Why you by the window? What's wrong, Daddy?
I know what's wrong with that crazy motherfucker. He just stand by the goddamn window with that fucking AK all day. You don't work, you don't fuck, you don't eat, you don't do a goddamn thing.
This one, I like this song better than the last one. It does a good job of portraying the paranoia of his situation at the time, and it's prophetic too, with what ended up happening with him.
Yeah, I also like the sample they use in the hook. I don't feel like it's as relevant, but it sounds good on the hook, and having that help out the hook definitely helps out the song as a whole.
Did you guys like it repeated? I always find myself frustrated that it's repeated twice per hook, and it's like 4 or 5 hooks throughout the song. It feels like too much to me.
I feel like there are too many hooks, but I like that it repeats twice in the hook. Makes the hook feel bigger, like it's an actual hook, not just a little tiny refrain.
I'd almost prefer if it was just a little tiny refrain. I don't hardly like any of the hooks on this entire album. I kind of wish they just
the hooks are pretty weak on the album, and they're way overused, I think.
Yeah. The hooks are weak, and this one is no different to me. But the verses are some of my favorite he's ever recorded, especially that third one, which is so rough, and like you can tell that he's yelling and he's just pissed off at that point, and I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty decent track. I do think it's pretty good, but I don't feel like it's the best track.
What about lyrically? What'd you guys think?
Lyrically?
It
feels like... It almost feels like a... What track was it? It was like a combination of 2 tracks. Lord Knows and some other track, I forget. I felt like those 2 ideas put together, but it just didn't do it as well,
It definitely is like the same as Lord Knows to a degree, because he talks about, he needs the weed to calm himself, and if he doesn't have it, he gets this paranoid. And that's the whole song is about paranoia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The intro is super funny to me because I can just picture him standing at the window with an AK, just waiting for someone to come get him. And I mean, it's ironic that he talks about being so scared of death throughout the album, but this song is like a complete flip, and it's like he's ready for death, but also not rushing to it. He doesn't seem as scared as he does elsewhere.
I feel like that happens a lot in this. That dichotomy is a huge theme throughout.
Yeah. Well, sounds like we're about done with that track. The next one, final track on the album, is Outlaw.
Hey, yo, what the fuck you want to be when you grow up, rah-rah?
Nigga, is you stupid? I want to be a motherfucking outlaw.
That's right, nigga. Housing these hoes, you feel me?
You know what I'm saying?
You got to do that shit. You keeping it real, nigga, or what?
Keeping it real.
How old are you, nigga?
I'm 11.
So, is the name of this track...
This intro is hilarious.
Is the name of this track a reference to the group you said he's a part of?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the features on it.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time, but I was surprised at how feature heavy this one was. That being said, the beat's good. The intro's hilarious. The little line at the end of each hook, "Dear God, I wonder could you save me?" That's phenomenal. I really like that little refrain.
I like that refrain, but I really don't like the outlaw. I don't like
That's
that
so
part.
awful.
It
That's
really
so bad.
is.
That's why this song is the worst song.
Interesting. I don't even think it was the worst. I don't think so.
Yeah, me neither.
Spoiler, sorry.
We'll get there.
The production, the features, and the outlaw part are just ugh.
But that spoken word outro is phenomenal. You can't tell me that's not good.
Yeah, I really like that part. Really helps bookend the album, you know?
Exactly.
No, I definitely think there was parts of this track that shine. I just think as a whole, I really don't care for the song. I mean, his flow feels a little off himself, but I mean, his voice is always on point. It's the front line of the song. It's not buried in the mix at all, which is great. I love it. Lyrically, it's just as good as elsewhere, but not better. And I just don't care for the features whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a significant...
I don't feel like the features were that bad, but I would definitely prefer that they weren't there.
I just think for an ending track to an album, this is fairly weak. I would almost prefer Death Around the Corner as the ending track.
I'm very happy with this being the ending track, if only for that that spoken word piece.
That is really good. I'll say. Yeah, that's definitely that feels like an end, like a wrap up.
Yeah, I think the spoken word piece was actually my favorite rhyme scheme on the album, because it caught me off guard how in depth the rhyme scheme was for a part where he's not rapping.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about the song.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, I liked it more than you did, for sure.
All right, well, that wraps up our discussion of the album. Overall thoughts? I'll start with me, but I thought overall this album really shows off Tupac's ability to rap, you know, his technical abilities in terms of rhyme scheme and stuff like that, his overall flow. But overall,
yeah, he's definitely got chops in it. It's proven.
Yeah, for sure.
For here.
But as a total album, it's kind of a slog for me to get through the whole hour of the album, because a lot of the tracks feel too samey because there's not enough diversity in what he talks about, you know? All the tracks just sort of blend into one. There's not enough to set them apart. So it makes it hard for me to go through the whole album. I can see the appeal of Tupac as an artist, but overall this album kind of was a letdown for me. You know, I feel like I'd be better off just listening to singles from this album than listening to the entire thing.
Yeah. This album is what I like to call playlist fodder. This is great on a playlist, and it's, you know, it's better out of context than as an album, I think. Which is really unfortunate. But yeah, as you were saying, the rhyme schemes, the flows, they vary. They're interesting all throughout. And even though the production is samey, it does let his technical ability stand forefront, which is definitely in the interest of the album. Overall, I appreciated how positive the messages were on this album as a whole. Even though, you know, it's dark and foreboding, there's plenty of tracks on this album where he does sort of advocate for some sort of positive outcome of this poor situation.
Yeah, for sure. Also, one last thing I want to say is this album brings up an interesting idea in my head of whether an album can be too coherent, where all of the songs kind of feel pointless because they're all the same, you know? Like, I prefer when an album is coherent and not just a collection of songs by an artist. But with this album, I felt like, for the most part, all of the songs had almost the same meaning in lyrical content. Variations, they branch off into different aspects of what he's talking about, but it's almost too cohesive. And it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah. As a really huge Tupac fan and someone who's listened to this album probably hundreds of times, probably not fair, but I've listened to it a lot. I agree with what you guys said. I think this really does show too much coherence, and when I listen to him, I listen to songs more than I do albums by him. I think this is his best and most coherent album, but I think that's why it makes it okay as an album. But some of the songs on here I love. They're wonderful. But I don't tend to listen to this album straight through. I usually have, out of, 14 songs? I usually have like 8 or like 7 or 8, like about half that I'll listen to regularly. But I will say you can tell this album, or every song fits on this album. None of them feel really out of place. And a lot of his music as a whole is on the same topics, but to me it's more impressive that he can continue to make songs on the same topics and always have a new perspective or new lines that always catch me as being different or meaningful still. Overall, I really like this album. I think it's his best album as a whole, but it definitely is missing some of his best songs.
All right. Well, let's move on to our favorites and least favorites. So, starting with your 3 favorite tracks. Let's start with you, TJ.
All right. My favorite track on the album is probably So Many Tears. I do like the harmonica in the hook. The sort of buildup of the track quality really adds to the sense of progression of the song. And it was just a great sort of message. Dear Mama for the second one. It's just stand out on its own merits. It's popular for a reason. It's great, and it's a nice reprieve from the sort of sameness that appears on this album. And the third, I suppose, would be probably Death Around the Corner.
All
right. Don't really have much to say about it, but I felt like the third spot was really contested. There's the same sort of quality for most of the album, so a lot of tracks could go in this spot, just depending on my mood.
Yeah.
The worst track, though, was, for me, Can You Get Away? Just, I don't like it.
Well, my 3 favorites start... Well, my favorite track on the album was without a doubt Old School. I really like that song. It sticks out really well on the album. I love the production, the hook, and his verses, his nostalgic verses, paying respect to what came before. And you really...
Yeah, you know what? Throw that in my third spot.
Wow.
All right.
You can't just change it.
Well, I just did.
Okay.
Yeah, but that has to be my favorite on that album. Followed pretty closely, but far enough back for it to be decisive, by Dear Mama. That's another song. I feel like a theme of my favorites is that they stick out on the album and they don't fade into the background with all the other tracks. Dear Mama does a good job of changing the pace, and it's really vulnerable and emotional, and I like seeing that side of Tupac as opposed to just the gun-carrying, dope-dealing person hustling in the game, you know? But then my third favorite like TJ said, it's pretty contested. Probably If I Die Tonight, because it represents the rest of the album, but I felt like this was the most pleasing to listen to track like that on the album. And then my least favorite was probably Temptations. That one, it does stick out on the album, but to me it feels like it has no place. It doesn't stick out for the right reasons, and it's just a boring song to me, and I don't really like listening to it. But anyway, Patricio, you have a lot of attachment to these songs, so I'm curious what your 3 favorites are.
Yeah, a lot of attachment to... Well, never mind. Anyway, so my first favorite, I gotta agree with TJ, would be So Many Tears. It's just a hard-hitting song. It's well-produced. Even though I mentioned how the chorus feels kind of weak to me, he transitions from it into it so well. And 4 verses is... all the 4 verses feel very full. Love it. Second would be If I Die Tonight. The alliteration on it, it's a great opener. The rhyme schemes are great. And the way he's prophesizing his own death, but also talking about bringing it upon himself, it's very self-reflective for the time and what he was going through. And he makes it very clear he understands that he's put himself in the position he's in. And I appreciate that. And my third favorite would be Lord Knows, because like If I Die Tonight, he's talking about putting himself in the same position, in a self-fulfilling prophecy that he's working his way toward. Paranoia, I think the vocal layering was great, and it really has some great single lines in it that just are hard-hitting, and they're easy to remember. What's it called? Memorable. There we go. That's the word. And for my least favorite song, yeah, I'd say it's Outlaw. I was gonna say Can You Get Away, but I can't deal with that chorus. It's just, and the features on it, I don't. It would have been much better without them.
All right.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Well, that was Tupac's Me Against the World. That was the 6th episode. Next week, the album pick comes back around to me, and that means I get to choose. So we're listening to 10 Day by Chance the Rapper next week. This is a album I really like, so I'm curious what you guys have to say about it. I know some of TJ's thoughts on it, but going more in depth will be interesting. So
I haven't heard it. I've only heard a couple songs from it.
Ooh, I can't wait.
All right. Well, we got that to look forward to next week. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you listen next week.